Inside the rooftop restaurant, the glow of chandeliers reflected against the polished glass windows, casting a golden hue on every smiling couple seated around. But at the corner table by the window, Amara sat alone. Her wheelchair was neatly tucked under the table, though she could still feel the eyes that occasionally darted her way. The hush of whispers followed, not loud enough to make out words, but sharp enough to sting. She straightened her blazer, her perfectly styled hair framing a face that betrayed no weakness except in her eyes, which kept flicking to the clock on the wall. Her blind date was already 20 minutes late. Every tick of the second hand was like a reminder of how foolish this was. She had been the youngest CEO in her industry, a woman who could bend entire boardrooms to her will with a single sentence. But since the accident, all anyone saw was the chair, the limitations, the unspoken tragedy. Her best friend had insisted she go out tonight, that she deserved a chance at happiness. Amara had reluctantly agreed, though deep down she doubted anyone could look past what she had lost. She tried to sip her wine, but her hand trembled. The waiter passed by with a polite smile, too polite, and asked if she wished to keep the table reserved. Heat rushed to her cheek. So was she really about to be stood up? The thought made her chest tighten. She forced a calm nod, though inside she felt the sharp edge of humiliation. Maybe it was a mistake to believe she could still belong in places like this, with people who lived without hesitation, without scars. Her fingers moved toward her purse, ready to signal that the evening was over, when the restaurant doors opened with a heavy push. The sound made her glance up. A man in worn jeans and grease-stained boots stepped in, his leather jacket out of place amid the suits and cocktail dresses. His hair was messy, his hands rough, and his presence immediately drew stares. Guests turned their heads, their polished expressions flickering with disapproval. Amara's brow furrowed. What on earth was a mechanic doing in this glittering world of crystal glasses and fine wines? For a brief moment, curiosity flickered in her chest right before she told herself she didn't care. But then, the man's searching eyes landed directly on her, and in that instant, her evening was no longer predictable. The man moved through the restaurant with a stride that was neither rushed nor hesitant, as if he belonged there despite his oil-stained boots and calloused hands. Amara's breath caught when he stopped right at her table. He leaned slightly, his smile crooked but warm. "You must be Amara," he said, his voice steady, casual, almost as if they had known each other for years. For a second, Amara's sharp instincts bristled. This couldn't be him. Her friend had promised someone well-suited to her world, a polished professional, a man who would understand the weight of her responsibilities. But this, a mechanic in a leather jacket? She raised her chin, her tone clipped like a CEO addressing an unprepared intern. "I think you're mistaken." Leo didn't flinch. He just gave a shrug that seemed to disarm the air between them. "Maybe, but my friend told me I'd find someone here waiting for me. And unless you're expecting another guy in grease boots, a broken bar." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat, ignoring the disapproving looks from nearby tables. Amara blinked, caught between annoyance and disbelief. Nobody ever sat across from her without permission. Nobody. The silence stretched, but Leo filled it easily. "You know, restaurants like this make me nervous," he admitted with a grin. "All these glasses, forks, and knives, a broken bar. I keep wondering if I'll use the wrong one and embarrass myself. At the shop, it's simply wrench, bolt, engine. No guesswork." Amara stared at him, lips parting, then closing again. He wasn't apologizing for who he was. He wasn't trying to impress her with suits or titles. Instead, he was being a broken bar eel. She wanted to cut him off, to tell him this was a disaster, but the words didn't come. Instead, she found herself listening as he talked about his long days fixing cars, his dream of opening his own garage where he could train young apprentices, his love for the smell of gasoline and the hum of an engine that finally comes to life after hours of work. At first, she tried to resist. She forced her expression into neutrality, sipping her wine as if he were invisible. Yet she couldn't help noticing how his eyes sparked with passion when he spoke, how his laughter rumbled from his chest without restraint. He wasn't looking at her wheelchair, not once. He wasn't softening his tone, wasn't avoiding her gaze with pity. He saw here the woman, not the chair, not the accident. And then it happened. He made a joke about a stubborn old truck that refused to start until he threatened to retire it permanently. And the image he painted was so vivid, so absurd, that Amara let out a sudden laugh. It burst out of her before she could stop it, raw and unpolished. The sound startled her more than it did him. She pressed a hand to her mouth, shaking her head. She hadn't laughed like that in months. Leo leaned back, eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "There it is," he said softly, almost to himself. "That smile, worth every awkward fork in this place." Amara's heart skipped. She wanted to stay guarded, to remind herself this was not the man she had expected. Yet a part of Hera buried under walls of grief and pride was stirring awake, drawn to the warmth of someone who wasn't trying to fix her, but simply wanted to share the table. When dinner finally ended, Amara half expected Leo to make a quick excuse and leave her at the table, like so many had before. But instead, he stood and walked around to her side without hesitation. "Let me walk you out," he said, not asking, just stating it as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The air outside was cool, touched with the scent of rain on stone. The city lights flickered in the distance, painting silver streaks across the wet pavement. Amara rolled forward slowly, and Leo matched her pace without rushing ahead or trailing behind, his hands casually in his jacket pockets. For once, she didn't feel like she was being escorted or pitied as she felt accompanied. By the car, silence lingered. Amara found herself staring at their reflections in the glass window, her own face looking back at her, a woman who had built an empire, who had lost more than she could ever explain, who had forgotten what it was like to feel light. Her throat tightened. She wanted to say something casual, something distant, but the truth slipped out instead. "I haven't smiled like this since a broken bar before the accident." Her voice broke on the last word, a crack she hadn't meant to reveal. Leo didn't look away. He bent down slightly, his eyes level with hers, steady and unflinching. "Engines break down all the time," he said quietly. "People do too. But breaking doesn't mean you stop being what you are. You're not ruined, Amara. You're just a broken bar waiting for the right spark." Her chest ached, a strange warmth unfurling where there had only been emptiness for so long. She wanted to argue, to dismiss him with the sharpness that usually kept people at a distance. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, her eyes locked on his, and for a moment the world narrowed to the space between Thema the mechanic with grease under his fingernails and a woman who thought she was untouchable, both standing at the edge of something neither had expected. The hum of the city filled the silence, cars passing, voices drifting from the restaurant terrace. Yet all Amara could hear was the quiet thud of her own heartbeat. She hadn't come tonight looking for hope. She hadn't believed there was any left for her. But here it was, sneaking into her chest, uninvited, unstoppable. Her lips curved slowly, tentatively, into a smile, not the polished, guarded smile she wore in boardrooms, but a fragile, real one. And as Leo's answering grin spread across his face, she realized the disaster of the evening had turned into something else entirely. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it.